we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to LTUE's Conference at the Edge of the Universe. You're in the Rocket Room, and today we've got, to start us off, Tom Morell. Tom is a YouTube game teacher, and he is presenting LTUE's first official list of the best board games for writers to develop stories, settings, characters, and more. So we're going to give it over to you, Tom. Take it away and tell us what you got for us.
You bet. Hey, thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everybody that is out there watching. My name is Tom Morell. Tom teaches on YouTube, and if you are interested, you can go to my website, tomteachesgames.com. I started that channel I would guess it was about 5 years ago, and I just wanted an opportunity to, if you are interested, teach board games. I often find that, like, when people are trying to learn a board game, sometimes the crumble happens in the teach, and so I was trying to kind of demonstrate great ways to teach a board game. And then that kind of also evolved into storage solutions and all sorts of malarkey. But this presentation is going to be the top 10 or 30, depending on, like, I have some honorable mentions, of course, we'll throw in there. Games for writers who are seeking inspiration. And so that's going to kind of be the theme of what we're talking about today. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the creative processes that I've come up with in storytelling. First of all, I always kind of believe that stories happen organically, that sometimes it's kind of like a treasure hunt where you have a map or a series of clues, and as you start following the clues and eventually get to the X on the map, you start digging, and it's possible you found a treasure, and you know it, and you can feel it. And sometimes you find a rock and realize that there was a dud. Or sometimes you might not find anything. And the big question there is, okay, what do you do next? Do you keep digging, or do you move to a new location? Kind of that ebb and flow. And so just kind of, I wanted to emphasize this idea that I do feel like stories can build and grow organically, but sometimes we need a few clues to get us on the right path. I wanted to take you back to my high school days, 2003. I was in a language arts class, and my friends and I had an assignment. We had to make a video presentation for the mayor of Casterbridge. And we had so much fun doing that in the summer between high school and college starting, that week before college started, we decided, hey, we're going to make another movie. And we had no clue what we wanted to do with that. So we kind of did this activity where we took a dictionary, we all opened up to a page, pointed to a word. So there were three of us, and we picked three words: gossamer, laryngitis, and fiddle faddle. And from that, within a couple of hours, we had a story drafted up. And the next day, we took the full day and we recorded this ridiculously stupid movie. But it's become such an organic part of our lives. And, like, we're always talking about gossamer. This is a trailer that I made up for this movie. But just the idea that we can take little hints of inspiration, and when we roll with it, that we can find something kind of magical. And Ryan, I can hear you in the microphone. So I'm not a big writer. I've written a couple of things here and there, but in general, I kind of thought about 10 different elements of writing that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. So obviously there are more, or maybe you can group some of these together, but 10 elements of writing that I want to talk about. And specifically what I want to do is focus on how you can use a game to inspire one of these 10 items. First thing I wanted to say, though, is a quick note on theme. This is a tricky one because theme is such an overused and complicated word in the board game world, and theme is obviously one of the most important things in storytelling. I've kept that off of my list, but I wanted to acknowledge it up front because it is such an important word. So one reason I kept it off the list is because theme in a board game means something very different than the theme of literature, so of narrative writing, definitely. So that's the main reason that I kind of avoided that word. But also, I kind of had this feeling in my insides that if you are creating art or if you are writing something, the theme is something that's super personal. Like, it's why you're writing. So I don't know that I love the idea for myself of leaving a theme up to chance or as something they were seeking inspiration from. So I just wanted to acknowledge why I don't have theme on that list, even though I think it's probably the most important thing, but that's why I kept it off of this list. The other thing I want to say is, in my game list, that I intentionally mostly avoided things like games that have a campaign. I avoided legacy games. I avoided for the most part, storybook games or like detective games. Specifically, I avoided games where the story already exists. And yes, even though you're kind of telling your own personal story and there are small branches in and out of those things, um, I kind of felt like that writing has already happened, even if there are small diversions here and there. But what I wanted to do is take non-storytelling games and talk about how those can inspire a unique story. So I'll mention a couple here and there, but I'll be specific about that. So with that said, that's going to be the structure is I'm going to talk about these 10 different elements in writing and how you can use games to inspire those to hopefully inspire a bigger story. So I'm just going to go in this order. And I'm a middle school math teacher by trade, and so I love good interaction. Obviously, Ryan's going to be watching the chat. If he feels like something is going to come up, great. Hey, I totally invite you to make this a two-way street. Okay, so first of all, characters. And again, as not a writer, I'm going to define how I interpret these words. Characters, who is in your story? So my number one recommendation for character development in terms of writing is a game like Role Player. So for people who have never heard of this game, basically Role Player is a game, it's a dice game, created around the idea of the game of Role Player is you are creating a character for a game like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. So the game is the character creation. And so I've always thought it would be super fun to take a character that you would have created at the end of Role Player and to develop a story around that. So that's going to be my number one game mentioned for character creation is the game Role Player. It is a little bit fantasy specific. So if you're outside of that genre, you may want to tinker with the idea of changing some of the characteristics of the characters you create in there. But super great way if you wanted to develop a story around some characters. Role Player is going to be one of those. I do have some honorable mentions I'm going to throw out there. Number one, there's a really obscure game called Heroes Wanted. I don't know that a lot of people have heard of this, but at the beginning of Heroes Wanted, you are creating a character. Like there's a deck of top half of bodies and bottom half of bodies, and they each have their own characteristic. And the idea is you pick one random top half, one random bottom half. It gives you a name. It gives you a style, like there's actually a drawing there. And then also they have special powers. If you've ever read the Tick comics or seen the classic 90s cartoon, that's the kind of characters that you're creating in those, but they're super fun. And so, yeah, Heroes Wanted is a great way. If you just took those two deck of cards, flip them over, you could get some great characters. And even though I said I was going to avoid legacy games, I do want to do a shout out to Pandemic Legacy Season 0, because a lot of that setup is about starting to create your character. And so some things to consider as you are picking games to maybe inspire character creation is, number one, are you creating a character that's a protagonist, an antagonist, or maybe a side character or something like that? You can always keep that in mind as you're creating your characters. Maybe you make a protagonist to start off, and then an antagonist, and then something else. And then also, when you're looking specifically for games to choose for character inspiration, are you picking a game where the characters already exist? Or is this a game where you are allowed to create your own character? So that's kind of, in these examples, these are all games where you create your own character, and that's why I think that they're great for character inspiration. All right, we're going to go to our next one, setting. So the way that I define setting is, where is the story happening? And my number one pick for that was the Quacks of Quedlinburg, only because, like, as I was looking at my shelf, it is my all-time favorite game right now. So I had to get it in here somewhere. But what I love about this is the game, The Quacks of Quedlinburg, is a game about a bunch of amateur potion creators at a potion convention doing their best to show off their potion making skills. And sometimes that blows up in their face. And so I loved that setting, the idea that I could look at this game, The Quacks of Quedlinburg, and I would, like, for me, I would love to learn more about that world, about the characters in this setting of this potion convention where amateurs are trying to show off their best skills. So I thought that was super fun. Some honorable mentions are things that like the game Scythe became super popular because of its extremely evocative art. The art almost has like a Cold War feel, with these gigantic monster machines in the background. Like just looking at the art evokes this setting that like I would love to learn more about. I would love to read a story about the things happening in Scythe. And Scythe itself is a game created. It was inspired by a set of art by the artist. My understanding is that the designer of the game saw the art, went to the artist and said, "Hey, I'd love to make a game around this art." And so, kind of, I love this trail of inspiration that can inspire stories there. And settings don't have to be whimsical or fantastical. I think the Great Western Trail is a very realistic, practical setting, based in history that could be used. Or you can kind of go to like a slightly fantasy, medieval time kind of a setting like Carcassonne. So again, just trying to take this idea, and something to consider is looking at your games and saying, is there a world that already exists within these games that I can jump into? And things to consider are, what are the rules of this world? How do the rules of that world affect other elements in the story? If you have the Great Western Trail, is that a setting that you would want to zoom into, focus on a specific part of the Great Western Trail? Would you want to zoom out of it and see what's happening on the bigger scale? So kind of just thinking about setting and the ability to zoom in and out. All right, next up is plot. And again, for me, the way I think about plot is just what is happening? What's the sequence of events that are happening to unfold this story? My number one pick for this one was Xia, Legends of a Drift System. And I specifically picked this one because it's an open world sandbox game. And so when you get into this game, there are so many different things that you can do in order to, like, different paths you can go on. You're essentially picking your own missions as you're going along. And so some honorable mentions I have here in terms of plot. Well, let me finish talking about Xia. What I like about Xia is that you're going to get a mission and you go on that mission, and that could be your story. Or once you finish that mission, once you've picked up and delivered, then you're going to get a different mission and go on. So I like this idea that that story can be whatever you want it to be. You as the player have a lot of control of what's happening there. And I find that that's going to be the case with any open world sandbox types games. And there are several out there to choose from. I have some honorable mentions because I kind of wanted to dive into this idea that you can really open up your mind and not just stick with an open world game. Above and Below is also kind of open world. It's a storybook game. Again, one of these examples that I said I was going to avoid. But the reason why I'm allowing this here is this type of storytelling game essentially has hundreds of mini stories that you as a player could then take and weave together and create something unique. I thought the Quest for El Dorado was an interesting example because that one is not a storytelling game by nature, but it can inspire and evoke the idea for a story where you're going on a quest for El Dorado. The Crew, similar idea to the Quest for El Dorado. Maybe that's not a plot heavy game, but I like that it can inspire this idea of telling a story about a crew diving deep into space and having limited communications and things like that. And one of the earliest games that I ever played when I was getting into the hobby was Gloom. Gloom is this really fun, fascinating game where you have a bunch of characters and a bunch of events and see through cards. And essentially, you're trying to play cards down onto characters. And like the game in its rules, the whole point of the game is to tell the story of these characters as different events are happening to them. And so, kind of this idea that don't restrict yourself in the gaming world to only games that have a plot pre-built, but you can pick games that tell you to tell the story, or you can even pick a game that has a story being told and just flesh it out even more. Like, again, not typical plot style games. I meant to say this at the beginning. Hopefully, I have no clue what's happening in the chat. I am brand new to Discord, but I love the idea. If you're sitting there in the chat and you think of games that could inspire these different elements, boom, throw them in the chat. Let's get some creativity going. It'd be cool to see some creative juices you walk away with this.
Yeah, there is a good one, but it's back for characters. Is that all right?
Listen, hit me with it. Let's go back to characters. What was a good one that you saw for characters?
Yeah, Mike Bishop and Bruce Allred mentioned Lords of Waterdeep.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Okay, cool. I like that. And especially because you're going on so many different quests. That's a great one.
Oh yeah, speaking of quests, I really like Shadows of Camelot for a good plot and
Yes,
story.
for storytelling.
And then Mike mentioned a game that he can't remember the name of, but it's one where you invent a new language. Have you heard of a game like that?
I don't know again. Yeah, I don't know about creating new languages that I can think, not off the top of my head, but if we get that title, I do want to hear it because that sounds crazy fascinating. Like we played that was it UgTech? We're going off tag. Okay, UgTech was where we were trying to hit each anyway. That's the thing. Okay, cool. So yeah, awesome. And please feel free if as I go, we don't have to do this every three slides or whatever. I've got my eye on the clock. So we're 3 out of 10 down. Cool. All right. So we're on conflict. Why are the antagonists and the protagonists in a battle? My number one pick for this one is Spirit Island. Spirit Island is this beautiful game about basically you play as a spirit and you're trying to protect this island from the colonizers and the invaders coming in. So obviously, this game is rich, full of conflict. Watching how the colonizers are moving and what the spirits do to try to get them off of the island. So like it's a very clean example of this fascinating conflict in between the spirits of an island and these colonizers. So I love that one. Betrayal at House on the Hill, or we just played Betrayal Legacy, just finished last week. What I love about this one as a inspiration for conflict is that in Betrayal of House on the Hill is that you all start off cooperating, working together, exploring this house, and then at some point there's a trigger, and you learn about the traitor and why that conflict exists, and you kind of fill in the story in your head. So I think that that's a really fun one. And then finally, Cosmic Encounters is a totally different kind of conflict. It's fully competitive, but within that game, it's full of like negotiations and like basically people just trying they're making decisions that you wouldn't expect for their own needs. And also anyway, so I love this idea of bringing in a negotiation style game and watching why people are making the choices that they're making and how they're forming the alliances and the conflicts that get in there. So just seeking inspiration about conflicts and the reasons for the conflicts are kind of here. So Ryan, before the next slide, any good ones that you saw in the chat of recommendations there?
No, not yet.
Okay, cool. You just let me know. Some things to consider when picking a game to inspire conflict is number one, how does the setting and the rules that are established in that setting, how do those interact with the conflict? Is that restricting the way that players and that the characters can interact with each other? Also, how does the conflict play out in this game? So again, kind of Spirit Island is fully cooperative, and then you have the game running the bad side of that. Or Betrayal, you're starting cooperatively, and then at some point there's a shift. And then Cosmic Encounter, the way the conflict plays out is it's all about negotiating and trying to play by social rules instead of necessarily rules within the game. My next one is point of view. And the way I define this is how do different characters interact with the world in different ways? A really plain example of this is the game Pandemic. In Pandemic, you're playing a character, and each of the characters within that game all have a special role, and that really affects the decisions that you as a player are going to make. So if you kind of look at Pandemic playing out from like an overhead view, you're going to see that the medic is going to behave a lot differently than the oh geez, I'm blanking out on all the rules, but basically the is there a call center character? The dispatcher. So like the dispatcher sees the world in one way, they're kind of in the office and watching the pandemic play out from there, versus the medic who's running around and trying to solve things, versus your researcher. And so I really like the idea that even though there's one story unfolding in Pandemic, the different points of view can lend to different types of stories within the world of Pandemic. Really similar for Space Cadets. With Space Cadets, that's a cooperative game. You can kind of think Star Trek world. But in Pandemic, everyone's kind of still playing the same game. They just have special abilities. In Space Cadets, everyone is completely playing their own game. They have their own mini game sitting in front of them. And so they're viewing the events that are happening outside differently from one another, and they're even acting very differently than one another. So I love that. You also have games like Fury of Dracula, these hidden movement games where one person is moving around a map in a hidden way, and then you have other people trying to find them. So in that case, you have one player who has a point of view, and then all of the other players have a different point of view, and kind of the conflict and the points of view play out that way. Finally, especially from I think they're pronounced Leader Games, they're the kings right now of asymmetric gameplay, and so Root is their biggest example where you live in this world of Root, which is also an incredible setting. Um, but each player has a totally unique way to play, and it's competitive. And so you're going to have your Marquise faction is going to be interacting very differently than the Ire. I don't know how to pronounce some of these words. This is why I, stay off camera. But all of these different things are playing so differently from one another. And so how does the point of view affect the way that the conflict in the world is seen? Okay, that's our halfway point, and we're moving to motivation, but I'll pause. Yeah. So
Yeah, we
Ryan,
do
you
have a
got any?
couple. Mike was able to remember the name of that game. It's called Dialect, and it's by Thorny
I don't know
Games.
anything about this.
It looks
but
like
I
an
am
indie
writing it
game,
down.
and the picture looks awesome. So
Okay,
Google that.
game night.
Dialect
We're
by
gonna do
Thorny
that.
Games.
Okay, cool.
It's a
That's
game about
awesome.
an isolated community, their language, and what it means for that language to die. I know, right?
Jeez, I don't know anything about this. Yeah, okay, that's a first for me. I'm
And
excited.
then Jenna in the chat wants to know if you've played Weird Doomed.
I've heard of Weird Dune, but I have not played it. Which of these aspects do you think that is a good inspiration for?
Which one is that one good for, Jenna? Strong story, creating a fascinating microcosm of realistic political situations with different
Cool,
roles and
conflict.
motivations. So it's a
I
good
love
point of
that.
view,
Good point of
different
view.
roles and stuff.
Yeah, and what I love about that recommendation is that so many of these games fit into so many categories. Like I said, as soon as I saw Root, I was like, I should have put this in the setting category because that setting is so cool. Okay, cool. So we're halfway there. Motivation. And okay, I'm just moving along. Motivation. Why are your characters behaving the way that they are? The first one that I thought of was Dead of Winter. Dead of Winter is great at having it's a hidden objective game. So like there's a public objective that everybody's working towards, but also each character has a hidden objective, and there's also this fear that one of you is a traitor. And so a lot of times to meet your private goal, you're making decisions that make people suspicious of you, even if you're not a traitor within this game. And so you're constantly asking, why is that person doing the thing they're doing? Are they doing that because they're a traitor? Or are they just trying to meet their personal goal and they are cooperating with us? So I think Dead of Winter is this incredible study of motivation and trying to figure out why people are behaving the way that they are. We had a great round of this, Ryan and I, with our kids. The other day, we had a round of Betrayal Legacy where the traitor was hidden, and just super funny and fascinating to play with the kids and to listen to how they were thinking about who was the traitor and not the traitor. It was me, but I was totally in a really awful way able to, pinpoint it on one of the children. So um, another game about with hidden or with private. I don't even. I think these are public, but Suburbia is a game where you're building up your suburbs, but the way you build up your suburb is going to change from game to game because you're given objectives to work towards. And so you're the way you're thinking about building your neighborhood is just going to shift from game to game. The other huge one, I've never played the King's Dilemma, but I know enough about it and I really want to play it. But basically, the King's Dilemma puts players in a situation where they're having to make tough choices between two bad options. And even though it's all fun and games, my understanding is that you really do feel torn in having to make like morally wrong choices. But you're basically faced with two morally wrong choices and having to pick the best one, and a lot of interesting motivational thoughts there. But that would be a great game to pull. Why is this character doing what they're doing? The next one I have is style. And the way that I kind of define style as I was thinking through this is, how do you, as the writer, connect the reader to the story? How do you bring them into the world? What are some of the cosmetic things that you do in order for that to happen? And the first thing I thought of in this example was Galaxy Trucker. I'm not sure if you've ever seen or read the rule book for Galaxy Trucker, but first of all, you can look at the artwork and see like there's this goofy ship with these really adorable characters, and the ship is falling apart as meteors are coming to hit it. And so, like, that's already really evocative. Like, I can get sucked into that idea. But if you've ever read that rule book is so hilarious. Like, I think it was the first rule book that I read where I was like, oh, yeah, rule books don't actually have to be serious. And so it just pulls you into this, like, super fun and goofy point of view there with the style. Two other very different ways to view style are number one, Tsuro. I got this game when it first came out, so I'm not sure if subsequent printings are still like this, but this game is like beautiful and evocative. And you open it up, and the rule book looks like it's like stamped together with one of those wax stamps. And then there's like this really nice, like it's not wax paper, but it's kind of like wax paper overlay with a letter to the purchaser. Like it's just this gorgeous game, and it's so simple. Like this is a game that you could play with anybody, but the way that they've presented it is super cool. And finally, the Grizzled. Again, same idea is that you can just look at that artwork and know, wow, this is going to be like kind of a darker theme. It's going to be like not super clean, and it's hard to see. I'm going to try to let me put my face by the camera, but right there on the cover of the book, it says, "Can friendship be stronger than war?" And so it's already setting this like really fascinating dark tone. It's like the love of friendship set against the setting of a war. So it's like fascinating. So like you can use games to evoke ideas about style. How do you want to connect to the reader? What types of language would you use? I'm going to pause really quick. Ryan, do you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, you got a lot of upvotes on Suro. A lot of that was a big popular
Yeah,
one. Um,
yeah, it's a great one.
and somebody brought up Love Letter as a good mention on theme or style is a good one. And
Yeah, that's also the presentation of that one. And a little bag, like this velvet bag, is very cool.
yeah, and then somebody asked if you could recommend games that are good for a story that oh, I put style instead of story that are good with large groups. So I guess like
Let me
six or more. Think about that.
style games for six or more. Okay, I will do my best to think
Sorry,
about
no,
it as I'm
yeah,
still
style
talking.
games. Yep.
Okay, okay. And like, I mean, I could just show the shelves and maybe you pick one for six. It's just hard to find a game for six or more people anyway. My very first thought, honestly, as you said that, is Don't Mess with Cthulhu. That game is great with six or more people. And the way that the rule book isn't so much style building, but definitely the artwork is very style building because like it's Cthulhu, which is always kind of dark. It's about a cult, but they lighten it and make it family friendly for this big group just by changing the way that the art is. And I think that that's kind of cool. So that's my first recommendation off the top of my head.
Awesome. She says thanks.
All right, next up, I wanted to set up atmosphere, and I had to take a minute to figure out how style was different than atmosphere to me. And again, style for me is connecting. How do you connect the reader to the story? Like what outside of the story things you're bringing in, whether it's language or artwork or whatever. But the way that I thought about atmosphere was like, how do you want your readers to feel as they're in the story? And so the idea that you can kind of create feeling and setting this atmosphere or be inspired by a game and its atmosphere that it creates. So I think the number one recommendation that probably a lot of you, if you know this game, have thought about is Tokaido. So Tokaido is this game that's supposed to be a peaceful walk. Like you are taking your character and going on a peaceful walk, and this beautiful, I think it's watercolor artwork, and you're basically just trying to collect pieces of a panorama and just create art in front of you. So like it's super serene, it's calm, it's like this beautiful feeling. And then I'm going to contrast that with one of my honorable mentions, Fuse. The exact opposite. Fuse is a frantic 10-minute game with dice rolling and screaming and like total chaos. And so I just love this idea that within a game, like I literally designed a game. Hey, any publishers out there, I have a great game. I designed a game based off of a feeling I wanted to recreate from a different game. I was like, I would love to bring people to a table and have this feeling happen inside of their guts. And I developed a game off of that. And so I put this in here because I imagine that that's the same thing for writing. You want to write something that puts you at peace, that makes you frantic and that makes you excited. Or the game The Last Will. Like Last Will is about you had a super rich uncle who um, died and left a ton of money, but he only wants to give it to the person who can have the most fun with it before they die. So it's like this very silly atmosphere, and really goofy. Versus, any of the Arkham horror games, they're trying to put you into a tense, fearful mode, kind of like the characters in the game having to test their willpower and stuff like that. So I love the idea of looking at the shelf and picking a game and saying, okay, what am I supposed to feel when playing this game? And could I replicate that in some of my writing? Okay, we're getting down to it. So let me get through these last couple. Structure. I thought of structure as how will the story of the game unfold and how could that be replicated in a story that you want to tell through writing? The first one I thought of was time stories. So time stories is one that already has a story to tell. So I kind of wanted to keep it off the list, but it was the way that it tells the story that's interesting. You start to explore the story, and at some point you run out of time and you have to rewind and start the story again, but with better information. And so you can get farther into the story, and then you're going to rewind and do it again, kind of a Groundhog Day type of a thing. So I thought that that was a really interesting structure for the way that this story that already exists is being told. And then I kind of wanted to play with this idea that some games, for their structure, play with time differently. And so, for example, terraforming Mars, the idea of terraforming Mars is not something that happens in an hour or a year. This is something where every round is a different generation. And so, yeah, so the idea that you can look for games that tell a story in a short amount of time or from one generation to the next generation. Finally, I put Dominion on here because Dominion is a great example of the three-act story structure. There's a very clear beginning, middle, and an end. The beginning, you're building an engine. The end, you get that engine really moving, and finally, in the middle, you get the engine running, and then by the end, you're trying to cash out for points. And a lot of these deck builders or engine builders have that structure of a clear beginning, middle, and an end.
Splendor's like that
Finally,
one too.
genre. Splendor is totally like that one, yeah, because you want to be collecting those easy cards until at some point you've got to get those cashed out for points and kind of that trigger there. Genre, where does your story fit in the realm of stories? And so with board games, this is both pretty simple, but also can be complicated. It depends on what you're talking about. You have the themes here of horror, Western, space, sci-fi. But you also have a different way to think about genre. You also have the mechanisms in the game. So horrified is a cooperative genre. So this is both horror and cooperative. Western Legends is competitive and it's open world and it's Western. Starship Samurai is this really cool mix of samurais in space. And so like the thing to think about when you're looking for games for inspiration for your story is which genre compacted into this game are you talking about? And can you take two different genres and mix them, kind of like Starship Samurai? I love the idea of playing with that. So I actually that's the end of the 10 categories. If you wanted to say anything, Ryan, as I look at the clock, I think we're down to 9 minutes. Is
Yeah.
that true?
Well,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
like 4 or 5 minutes, but we're good.
Oh, okay. I
What
couldn't
about
remember if we were
just Smash
45 or
Up as far
50.
as genre goes? Like that's a game that we like to play a lot. Is just Smash Up.
Yeah, Smash Up at Your House is huge. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and also kind of like Starship Samurai, by the way, if you've never played that. Yeah, so that's cool. So like I have some activities, or we can keep it for question and answer. So I have, like I said, I have two activities we could throw up and then people could participate in terms of being inspired by a game to write a story, or we could do some Q&A, whatever the people want. This is a
Let's do an
democracy.
activity. I've been asking you questions
Yeah.
as we go along, so I
Okay,
think we're all caught
cool.
up.
I love it. All right. Activity number one. Here are three games that I've thrown on the screen. Your job is to pick one of the 10 elements that we've talked about, assign them to each of the games. So you're going to ultimately pick three different elements. Man, it is pouring outside my house, just so you know. Okay. You're going to pick three different elements, tag them into one of those games, and then could you make an interesting story with it? As you're doing that, quick wrapping back around to Gossamer, that movie that I talked about at the beginning, is we started with three words and we were really inspired by the word Gossamer and laryngitis. We created the whole one, and we tried so hard to get the word fiddle faddle to work, but eventually we had to just drop it. But it's okay that it was there because it was like challenging us and pushing us. So as I wanted to say, like maybe you throw out three different ideas and say, could I make a story of this? And again, you go where it goes organically. You follow that treasure chest until you hit treasure. And if you're hitting a rock, then you just move on and go to something else. Okay, I'm going to pause. Ryan, did you participate? I want to know what your three picks were for these ones.
I did participate. So Settlers of Catan is a good, like if you look at it as a setting, as we're in this land, we're trying to build up our settlements and have to trade with a bunch of people. It's a good setting. There's plenty of conflict in Settlers of Catan when you start trying to make trades with people.
Totally.
And you have to figure out like who you're going to put the thief on and stuff and everything. There's tons of conflict there. And maybe even motivation. Like if I was writing a story about Catan, like the motivation is to not starve, right? To build up their walls and get all that stuff going. So there's a lot of motivation in there too.
Yeah, or even like you said, conflict, or you can get some conflict in there. There's a lot of mean conflict. Or like, is this person developing this area for their family, or are they trying to make money off of it and exploit it and kind of more of a capitalistic point of view? So the way that I did this is I kind of just grabbed these three games and I said, cool, I want to make a story using the conflict of Catan.
Oh, sorry.
The genre
of
Clank.
I see how you did it.
That's okay. No worries. And I wasn't super clear because this is my first time. And code names for characters. So I was kind of sitting there thinking, I wonder if it's possible to make a story in the genre of Clank, kind of this goofy sci-fi, with characters from code names. Could there be some spies in there? But the conflict of Catan, of like trying to outpace and outdo each other in some hard negotiations. I don't know if I could write that story, but I really liked the idea of starting there.
This is awesome.
Okay, so that was activity number one.
Okay.
I have another activity. Similar, but we're going to flip it on its side. So I've only been talking about games that I know because that's what I know. But as you were saying in the chat, there are games out there that I do not know about. And so an invitation for you and other people is to kind of look at your shelf or take mental inventory. I'm going to give you three elements, and I want you to go pick a game for each of those elements. So setting, point of view, and atmosphere. Do you have a game on your shelf or in your library that could inspire a setting? Do you have one that offers an interesting point of view perspective where characters have different motivations? And then finally, do you have one that could give you a cool atmosphere? And I know we're bumping up against that time. And so I'm going to... Which one? You're doing it. You're breaking the rules. Mysterium is such a good one. Yeah, that was one that we played. Man, we played the original Polish one, I think, when it first came out. Yeah. Cool. So these are the three that I picked. I thought it would be really fun to explore a story where the setting is the magic maze, these goofy characters plowing through a maze trying to get their equipment back. But from the point of view, kind of like Burgle Bros, in that Burgle Bros, everybody has a different role as they're trying to explore this office building. But the atmosphere of the mind, where there's really tense, nonverbal trying to communicate with one another. I thought that could be a really fun and interesting thing to explore more. So with that said, that was my top 10 or like 50 games for writers. Just trying to talk to you about the idea that you can get inspiration for a story just by looking at your game shelf and really thinking about how could this aspect be affected by one of these games or be inspired by one of those games. And that was it.
This is awesome. Thanks, Tom. The comments in the chat, if you're in our Discord's chat, are coming in, and people are mentioning Rise of Phoenixborn.
I don't know any of those. I don't know how to use Discord.
Aeon's End.
Oh, Rise of Phoenixborn. Oh, Aeon's End is one of my all-time favorites.
Right.
I'm caught up.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. We appreciate you being here with us and putting together our first official top 10 games for LTUE, for writers. It's been a great presentation, and we're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great conference, everybody. Bye.